Okay, let us begin our presentation for today. Let me just put this in here. Okay. All right, and we shall start now. Salam Pencak Silat. My dear brothers, welcome to our presentation for today. We're going to be looking at a weapon spotlight today, and that is the Badik of Sulawesi from the Bugis tribe. Now, we go through some of the regional weapons in Indonesia because it's really important to understand where these weapons come from, the significance of the techniques and things like that. And we need to understand the background of the things that we are using, the things that we're training, and the things that we hear about. It helps to expand our depth of knowledge in the world of Pencak Silat, and it helps to understand the things that we do, So I get very frustrated with people when they tell me that they're practitioners of Silat and they don't understand or know about even the basic things about the cultural background of the art that they study. So I find that to be very miserable. It's a very miserable state. It's like saying you're American and you can't speak English. It's not a good situation for you to be in. So you should be able to identify the different types of weapons that are part of Pencak Silat. You should be able to identify the benefits of them and the regions that they come from and some things that are behind them. Now, just hold on for one moment. I'm just going to go and close the door over here, and I'll be back in 1 second. Okay, so let's get on to our presentation. I purposely put into two pictures over here. The first one is in Sulawesi, and the second one over here is the actual Badik, and that is one kind of Badik. So now, first of all, where is Sulawesi? So again, there are major islands in Indonesia, and as I mentioned before, there are three major islands which you really need to know about, and those are uh, first of all, Sumatra. Okay, Sumatra is the biggest one. So if you look over here next to Malaysia, you have the huge island of Sumatra. And then underneath, you've got the island of Java. And or in Bahasa Malaysia and Bahasa Indonesia, it's called Jawa. So there is the capital city, the capital city of Jakarta. And then you have got another huge island, which is Sulawesi. Now, you also have this huge island over here, and this huge chunk of land is called Borneo. So these make up the four major islands in Indonesia. But the thing, Indonesia and Malaysia, because they are separated, and part of Borneo is actually Malaysia, and part of Borneo is Indonesia. Now, these, as I mentioned before, all used to be one large area called Nusantara. Now, really important to understand that the power base has always been in Sumatra or Jawa. That has been the power base of the Nusantara all the time. Sulawesi, it has been an important place for naval warfare specialists in terms of Pencak Silat traditionally, but it is not a place which ever had major positional power in the region. Never did it have that kind of regional power like Sumatra with the Sriwijaya Empire, or like Jawa with the Majapahit Empire. It never had that kind of status. Even though there were important people there and there were important powerful tribes, they never had regional power as the other two major islands did. The same with Borneo. Borneo had many powerful tribes and many powerful people, but it never had any kind of regional importance in terms of government and military power. It's always just been a place where the government has put some people and there have been some important things happening, but it's never been the central point of the Nusantara at any point in history. But just good to know. So we've got Sulawesi over here. But the thing with Sulawesi is that they have a super rich Silat history. And the Silat history in Sulawesi goes back 1,000 years. And it is very, very interesting because it's a very close mix between what is happening in the south of Philippines. So for example, if you look at the area over here of Sulawesi and Borneo, they're very close to the southern Philippine sultanates. So in Basilan, in Jolo, in Mindanao, these southern sultanates in the Philippines and the area of Borneo and Sulawesi always had a lot of migration between them. So there's a lot of interesting things that happened there in terms of training, in terms of the exchange of the techniques of Pencak Silat. That's why you see a lot of the kind and style of movement which you have in Sulawesi Pencak Silat. It's very similar to what you would find in the southern parts of the Philippines. If you look at a system like, for example, let's say as a system, no, let's say Pakiti Tersia, okay? Pakiti Tersia system. So Pakiti Tersia or some other ones, Bahad Zabu, or some other systems which are very aggressive systems from the southern parts of the Philippines, very similar to the systems that you would find in Sulawesi because of the proximity and that cultural exchange over centuries, because the people are seafaring people. Okay, now if we look a little bit further on the other side, you'll see here Malaysia, of course, is part of it, and you'll see Sumatra also. Now, remember that people from Sulawesi, the tribes over there, they were seafaring people. So there is a lot of cultural exchange that is happening still. And there was a lot of cultural exchange that happened in the past because these people migrated from Sulawesi to the mainland of Malaysia and also to Sumatra and other places, Jawa, etc. But primarily, a large amount of Bugis tribe moved over into Malaysia. So we have a fairly large population of Bugis people over there, even though they're also under the umbrella of Malay, but ethnically they are Bugis people. So that's an interesting one because the umbrella of Malay people is like, it's an umbrella term to mean different people in Malaysia who are practicing or who speak Malay as a native language, but they're not actually ethnically Malay people. There are different tribes within there as well. As I mentioned, Bugis or Javanese or something like that, but they speak Bahasa Malaysia as their native language. Okay, now some historical notes, very important. Now, as you can see this picture over here, this is one of the most famous and extreme Bugis practices, which are super, super famous, and it is called Tarong Sarong. And that is going inside of the sarong and fighting each other and dueling to the death inside of that sarong. Absolutely amazing old tradition. It was used to settle disputes and things like that, and the family honor issues and other things like that, to end an issue with a determined, clear ending. So if there was an ongoing problem between a family, in order to settle that issue once and for all without any further dispute afterwards, you would have a tarong sarong. And then whoever wins in that tarong sarong, there's no talk, no negotiation after. The Sultan would not listen to anything after the result of that situation. So both families would have to accept the outcome, and they would be quiet afterwards, and the issue would be terminated at that point. So that's why Tarong Sarong was a very important part of traditionally settling disputes. So it is a long, long history within the culture of Orang Bugis. Now, the Sulawesi Bugis tribe, they are Orang Belayar. That means they are naval people. They are people who are living in a water environment. Even the whole area of Malaysia and Indonesia, we call it Tanah Air. That means the land of water, because it is surrounded by water, and there are so many different islands, and most tribes live in close to islands or water or something like that. So it is called Tanah Air. It's also called Nusantara. It is also called Malaysia or Indonesia. There's so many different names, but the traditional name for it is Tanah Air. Even when I speak to my wife, sometimes I say to her, "Kita balik Tanah Air." Let's go back to the land of water, because we want to go home. It's the same thing. So basically, these people are Orang Belayar. They are people who are living close to in close proximity to the ocean. They are seafaring warriors. And these tribes that are in Sulawesi, Bugis being the major tribe, they are people who have a lot of experience fighting in the naval environment. So they actually went out and they were involved in different types of disputes and warfare in the different areas in the Nusantara, because they were able to access those areas. Other people were landlocked, and they sent warriors all over the place, and they could easily access those places. So that's why you see Orang Bugis in so many places. You see them in Jawa, you see them in Sumatra, you see them in Malaysia, you see them all over the place in the South Philippines, because they were seafaring people. they could easily access with their boats all of those places, and they would be able to do different things, for example, in a military context, in a trading context, and also in the context of piracy. So sometimes they were involved in piracy, where they would attack enemy ships and then steal all of their belongings and take slaves and things like that. Those are things that happened as well with the Bugis tribe. So they're very famous. And also the English word, the boogeyman, actually comes from the Bugis tribe members, because when they would do, for example, some operations against occupying forces, the Dutch and the English, they would then go in there, swim over to the boats and climb up, kill people, and they were called the boogeyman for that reason. That's where we get this English word from, the boogeyman, from the people who are Bugis, original Bugis tribe. So, some coffee now. The second very important thing to know in the historical context is the difference between Mancha and Silat and Silek. Now, remember, I mentioned to you before, all of you, the word Pencak Silat is a relatively new term. We don't see it in traditional text. If you look at Hikayat Melayu, the old books of Malay history, Sejarah Melayu, if you look at Peraraton in Jawa, or any of the traditional old historical texts, you don't really find the word Pencak Silat in terms of, or bela diri or something like that, in terms of self-defense or martial arts or something like that. There are different words which were used. Now, every locality that you go to, they have their own type of silat, but their general area usually has a term which they use for it. When you go to Sulawesi, the word is mancha. That is the local term for martial arts. If you go to Jawa, the term is usually silat. And if you go to Sumatra or Borneo, the term is usually silat or silek. Silek is really Sumatra. And then silat would be Borneo and Jawa. So those are the different types. Of course, there are crossovers. There's a lot of cross-pollination between different systems, different tribes in different places. But generally, the people in those areas will be using a specific term which is local to them, like Sulawesi and Mancha. Now, is there any difference between the systems in terms of their functionality? I would say it's dependent on the system, and it's the quality of the training within the system, and it's also dependent on the person using the system. It's always those two things. There is no perfect system, and there's no perfect trainer or practitioner. It's always a balance, right? You can take a very hardcore system, like, for example, let's take Muay Thai as an example, and people can learn Muay Thai, and then they can be only mediocre in terms of capability of fighting, because physically and mentally they're just not in the game, even though they have done some training. And then you have some people who take a system which is supposed to be not really so combative, like karate or judo, and then they become, because of their mentality and the type of training they do, they become much more dangerous and very effective than the Muay Thai fighter. So it depends on system, it depends on practitioner, and that balance between the two and what their objectives are in the training. And I think all systems within Indonesia are pretty much the same. So the practitioners and there are differences between the training, differences between the styles and the mentalities and the philosophies behind the systems. But at the same time, it is highly dependent on how the person trains and what the person's aims are, and that individual's decision, what they want to use this for. But anyways, I digress. There are different names and things like that that the people use in the different areas. Now, third point, very important from the historical notes, is that Bugis people, they were known also as orang-orang di Raja. And those are the people, or the orang means people, and Raja means king. So the orang-orang di Raja were the people who protected the kings in these different areas. So because they were seafaring people, they got involved in the political and military disputes of many people in the local areas over there, and they got involved in it in a very high level. And because they were experts in warfare, and they were experts specifically in naval warfare, they were extremely valuable to local kings and princes. So these people would be hired as mercenaries in different political conflicts or military conflicts within the area. And they would then usually be at a very high level within the society very quickly because of their skill sets and their knowledge base. It's like when you look at special operations soldiers today, you can take a Navy SEAL out of the Navy SEAL teams in the United States and send him to Russia or send him to Malaysia or send him to Japan. He will still be an extremely valuable asset to that government over there. He's not going to, be hungry anytime soon. The skill sets that that individual has are valuable anywhere he goes to, especially if you go to places that have a situation of war or turmoil, which a lot of the local tribes had at that time. So what they would do is they would hire themselves out as mercenaries, or they would join different political factions within the area of the Nusantara, and they would give themselves out to the Sultan. And usually they would become the bodyguard of sultans or princes or something like that because of their skill sets and tactics and strategy and knowledge. The reason why they were highly prized is because they were more trustworthy a lot of the times than the local people. The local people who had connections to the different tribes, and also they had connections to the political infighting factions that were there. You could never be 100% sure who you could trust. So to get somebody who is not connected to any of these different people and just have that person employed by you to protect you and look after your security was always a very huge advantage. And we saw this not only in the Nusantara, but in the Middle East, in the European world, also, and in South America, everywhere, basically. So that's kind of the advantage of having people who are not connected to your local situation. There are also very extreme Bugis traditions, which made these people very famous. And Tarong Sarong, as I mentioned before, is one of those very, very aggressive and violent traditions that made these people extra tough and gave them a kind of a veneer of invincibility and excellence that made and excellence that made them feared amongst other people. This is obviously a very extreme type of tradition that they have. And there are other ones. So for example, where they would be, for example, stabbing their own hand to make a sumpa. And a sumpa is a kind of what is it called? Like I forgot the word now. It's on the tip of my tongue. It's unbelievable. Too many languages in one place. So basically when you would make what is the word? Forgot the bloody word. You would swear. That's the word in English. Sorry about that. So you would swear on something. So you would swear that you would do a specific action, or you would be involved in a specific situation, and that would be like, for example, sumpa. So they would do that, and then they would have a ceremony that goes along with it, and that would be for the Sultan or somebody else that they would make a swearing to or an allegiance to in public, that they would do a specific action or join a specific faction or something like that, right? For whatever reason. There are very famous people that are Bugis also. One of those extremely famous people actually is our former Prime Minister in Malaysia. His name was Dato Sri Najib Razak. And he famously said in a presentation one day, he said, "Saya pendekar Bugis, jangan main dengan pendekar Bugis." I am a Bugis pendekar, and you should never fool around with a Bugis pendekar. And that was a very famous statement that he made when his political opponents were attacking him. It was quite funny, actually. So he is now unfortunately in prison, even though he's one of my favorite Malaysian political figures. He's quite amusing individual and a smart guy, but unfortunately too greedy. Now he's in jail. But he's probably the most famous Bugis alive right now. And in the past, well, he's down here actually. And in the past, we have got the very famous Sultan, and that's Sultan Hasanodin. And he basically fought against the Dutch, and he also fought against the English, as far as I remember, or was it only the Dutch? Oh, maybe. Anyways, but he fought against colonizers who tried to take parts of Indonesia, and he did a very good job in that. So he became super famous, and he's got universities and airports and everything named after him now. So those are some super Bugis people. Now let's move on to our dagger. 1 second over here. Now we have got the Badik dagger. Now, the Badik, first of all, comes with many different types of materials. So the materials used inside of the manufacture of a blade, it doesn't matter which blade it is. It doesn't matter if it's the kris, it doesn't matter if it's Badik, it doesn't matter if it is a karambit or whichever one it is. When it comes to traditional blades in the Nusantara, any blade will, just by the materials that are used, will immediately tell you the social status of the owner. So it is the same thing in the Middle East. When you look at the quality of the blade manufacture, you can immediately identify the owner, or not the specific owner, but the owner's social status. That is not the case nowadays with modern weapons. This is one of the major differences between modern weapons and traditional weapons. The traditional weapon was also a status symbol. It's not like I carry a Spyderco today, and then the millionaire carries a Spyderco, and I carry a Spyderco, and it's the same. Completely different. The manufacturer of the weapon defines the status symbol of the individual, or betrays the status center, the status of the individual, because it is a status symbol, the weapon that they carry. Now, the reason for that obviously was because the weapon was publicly displayed. It wasn't something which you hid. So nowadays we carry weapons in mostly concealed positions. In the past, those weapons were carried primarily in public displays. So when you are a sultan or a multimillionaire businessman or something like that, you don't want to walk around with a weapon that's looking shabby. So you make sure that your weapon is equivalent to your status within the society. So what type of materials were used? Usually ivories, sandalwoods, silver, and gold. So ivories would be usually some kind of tanduk. The tanduk is the horn of different types of animals. It could be from an elephant, it could be from a rhino, it could be the bones of an animal. That's another kind of ivory that could be used, also a cheaper type. But usually it would be the horns. The horns are the most prized part that were used for different types of ivories from different animals. So that was usually the standard for very expensive pieces. That would be on the handle of the weapon. The cheaper weapons would always use some type of wood, standard wood. But if you've got horn, that's really, really expensive. Or horn inlays inside of the wood, where there are the horn and you have the wood and then you have horn, which is hammered into it. Very, very expensive workmanship as well. Also, the types of woods that were used are not regular woods. It's not some cheap, gyprock or something like that. It's not regular wood that's used, or wood chips or something smashed together. It's usually very, very expensive woods like sandalwoods, or any kind of hardwoods like ebony or something like that. These type of woods are very heavy and strong, and at the same time, they have a specific type of fragrance. So when you smell the wood, it has a very unique type of smell. And that smell was very important as well, because people cared about the way that the handles smelled, that they have a specific fragrance or perfume or something like that. Traditionally, in a lot of societies and tribes within the Nusantara and also within the Middle East, it was very common to perfume your weapons. They did the same thing in Japan as well. The samurai used to perfume their weapons, and they used to perfume their helmets and things like that before they fight. Nowadays, it's less of a value, because warfare is not face-to-face anymore in open fields. It is a guerrilla kind of situation where you're fighting and you don't want your enemy to see you right away. Of course, in those kind of situations, even in the past, you wouldn't perfume your weapons or your armor, because you don't want your enemy to smell you from half a mile away. But when you're dealing in face-to-face combat on an open field, and you're standing in front of the guy you want to kill, then it's irrelevant. You want to make sure your freaking head smells good after it's cut off, right? So very important. So that was a very common thing to do. Gold and silver also used, because again, those two super precious metals define the status of the individual. Now, carry positions. Traditionally, the badik is carried on the belt, because the sarong or whatever you're wearing, there's always a belt, some kind of pinggan or some pin or something like that, which is tied around you. And that belt is where you would put in your badik, and then it would be withdrawn either from a cross body position or it would be withdrawn from a side draw position like that in a reverse grip sometimes, but usually in a pistol grip. And that grip that you see there, when it comes out in a pistol grip, it's going to give you that classical triangle that you see all the time. And basically any weapon that you draw from that position, you're going to see that classical triangle there. And then we call that the combat triangle. So whenever you see that combat triangle coming out from here, or even when they're reaching from the back, you'll still see that triangle that's made with the arm on either side. Doesn't make any difference. Then you can see that it is coming from a belt level weapon. If it is more places where people are wearing robes, like the traditional Arabic robe or any kind of a robe, then most probably you're going to get a square box look, because it's going to come from the sleeve. So the person will go inside of the sleeve, so you will see the box position in front where the sleeve is being entered into, and then they'll take out the weapon and use it. So it's either usually a box or it's a triangle for carry positions. For the badik, most probably because of the wearing the sarong and the belt around, most probably the carry position is going to be with a triangle draw. Okay, so that's quite important. Now, usually the carry position is super important to understand, because when the weapon is drawn, remember that the badik, if you go to Sulawesi or parts of Indonesia or Malaysia, people still carry these weapons. So when they draw the weapon on you, it's going to be drawn from one of those positions. It's going to be either from the cross, or it's going to be from the side, or sometimes from the back, but usually the kris is from the back. But the badik is coming from either the side or the cross. So when you can identify the carry positions and the positions of the hands, you can easily have an idea if somebody is going to be drawing this weapon or not. Of course, it could be a different type of weapon, but those are the common carry positions for this one. Number 3, the pusaka, again, it's an heirloom. It's a social status, but it's also a mentality, right? So the pusaka is something which is given to the next generation. My son, my son, my sons, my sons, etc., or my daughter, my daughter, my daughter. So that is the pusaka, the heirloom, or my student, my student, my student, right? So that is the heirloom status which a badik has. It's a very important part of Bugis society. And to the point where they, in the mindset of Bugis people, there is no Bugis without a badik. Okay, you have to have one. This Bugis man is not a man unless he owns one of these, either on his person or at least in his home. It must be there. And I personally haven't met any Bugis that doesn't have one. They all have one. I haven't met any, even in Malaysia, I haven't met one that doesn't have one, even though they don't carry, but they have one at home. So it's similar like the Sikh people. The Sikh people will have a dagger, a similar thing. They have their own traditional dagger, and for Bugis people, it's very similar. They will be having somebody somewhere, most probably, and most probably at home these days, but it is there. So social status, very, very important in the society, and also mentality, because when you have the badik, it also represents your mentality of willingness to take care of yourself and take care of your family using the skills of your Pencak Silat. So if you don't have a weapon, what are you going to do? You know, it's a mindset issue. I always have a weapon, even if that weapon isn't a simple pen. I have a metal pen because I want to use this as a means of fighting. Then this is still part of that mentality, even though that it's not technically a weapon, but in my mindset, I'm always armed. So that's a very important thing. So the mentality of having the badik is an important part of Pencak Silat. Now, the types of the badik, you have the badik Makassar, what you can see over here, which is a little bit fat. Now, again, the point of the weapon is super important, because if you're using some kind of body armor or something like that, which they also used in the past, in order to pierce through that body armor, you need to have that very acute point. Now, the larger part, or the fatter part of the blade, was in order to create a larger wound in the body, because the technique is to turn. You're not going to stab straight. You're going to stab and you're going to be turning in order to dig out. It's like digging out a piece of the person when you pull out. So you're sticking in, you're turning, and then you're pulling out. So the technique is like a screwdriver. And that is always to make sure that you're damaging as much of the internal organs as possible, and you are able to then rip out that blade with maximum damage. So the Badik Bakasar, nice fat blade, very nice, ruthless, acute point, which makes a point. Next, you have the Badik Gechong, which is long and fat, and that is the one over here at the bottom. Let me just push this down. The one over here at the bottom. So there's a little bit of fatness again in the blade, but it's a little bit longer. And again, very acute point because of the stabbing importance. Now, remember that most of the killing techniques are done by stabs, and most of the debilitating techniques are done by slashes. So if you want to finish people off, it's the stab that finishes them. And if you want to debilitate people, it is the slashes that debilitate and get people ready for the finishing kill blows. So very important. And most Pencak Silat systems practice that type of thing as well, including Silat Sharaf. The slashes are for openers and the stabs are for finishers, whether it's reverse grip or whether it is front grip. Okay, so the Badik Gechong helps you to do that. Now you can also use it in the reverse grip fashion, but it is not as comfortable because of the pistol grip. You usually want to hold it in that type of a grip configuration. Now you also have the Badik Luwu, which is coming again, it's similar, but it is a straight blade, absolutely straight, and it is for piercing directly into the body, and a little bit longer again because it wants to reach the heart. So, or of course, other parts of the body as well, but you're able to get through the ribs and get through the heart. Very easy to enter into the body because of the thinness of the blade. So different reasons for it. Now, the Badik Makassar, Badik Gechong, Badik Luwu, they're all from different areas, represent different areas of Sulawesi. They're not all from one place. They're different areas. You also lastly have the Badik Melayu, and this one is specific to Malaysia. So remember we said there was a lot of influence that came from the Bugis tribe in Sulawesi to Malaysia, and because they were seafaring people, they brought the weapon with them. But in Malaysia, the weapon over the centuries became modified and the handle of the weapon became straight. So when you look at the Badik Melayu, you can see that the bottom of the handle is straighter and fatter. So you have kind of a pistol grip, but it's not 100% the same. And also you will see that it has a very fat bottom. The tail at the bottom over here is large, and that largeness is for striking, of course, and also for jabbing people into the facial area and in the eyes and things like that, because there's a protruding edge at the bottom. So the Badik Melayu was unique like that, and it was primarily used in Kelantan, which is Eastern Malaysia, and also in Kedah, which is the northern part of Malaysia. So when you see pictures, for example, when I'm training and stuff like that in the forest, that's usually in Kedah, in the forest. In the jungle, that's usually in Kedah, and that's my wife's village. Her ancestral home from there, her father's side. So that is the Badik Melayu. Now, very important also when it comes to the traditional weapons in Indonesia, specifically the Badik also, it has got falsafa. And falsafa is the philosophy that goes together with the weapon. Now, contrary to other types of weapons around the world, weapons in the Nusantara area always had some kind of philosophy that went along with them. It was never just a weapon or a tool to do something in war, or to do, there was always something related to Pencak Silat and philosophy that went along with it. Now, the reason for that is because of the difference between warrior culture and weapon culture. And I'll explain this in the next point afterwards. So let's take a look first of the first part of falsafa, and that is to understand the different points of the Badik. Now, the Badik has three parts. You have the ujung lidah, which is the curved part over here, which is the tongue. Lidah means tongue. And that is the tongue of the weapon. And then you have the ujung kelamin, which is like the top part, like the central part. And then you have the ujung badik, which is the sharp part. Now they have different meanings. So the first part, the tongue of the weapon, is basically representing diplomacy, because the term, like in English, the term saber rattling I'm holding the saber, but I'm not releasing it yet because we're not ready to fight yet. I'm not at the point where I'm ready to kill you, where I'm ready to fight. So there's still an air of diplomacy between me and the other person, or between our party and the other party. There's an air of diplomacy. Try to sort things out without violence, without bloodshed. That is the best way that you can solve a problem. Failing that, then you go to a tactical option, but always try to diplomacy first. But diplomacy does not function without power. There's no cat that negotiates with a mouse. A cat negotiates with another cat. A lion negotiates with another lion. A tiger negotiates with another tiger. A tiger does not negotiate with a mouse or with a rabbit. So that's why to have that power of being able to hold on to your badik, and it is ready for usage when required, but we are always ready to communicate. That is the power of diplomacy. It is diplomacy with the ability to act when it's required, not empty diplomacy from a position of weakness. That's unacceptable for Pencak Silat. Completely unacceptable. You negotiate from a position of power. You never negotiate from a position of weakness. There can be strategy involved where I negotiate from a position of weakness, apparently, because I want people to think that my party or I am weak. But that is not the actual case. That is strategy. That is deception. That is a different issue altogether. But as a regular standard, when we are talking to another party, when we are negotiating with another party, it must be from a position of strength or a position of equality, nothing else, not a position of weakness where we must accept what the other party says out of fear of reprisals or out of fear of losing something or anything else. So that is very important. You have ujung kelamin, which means basically the strength and manliness that you have as a warrior, as a man, right? And that strength is an internal power that you have, and you must have that. The same like the badik has the powerful center, the same that you have to have that powerful center and that powerful core of your values, of your training, of your belief, of your ancestry, of who you are as an individual, as a man. That must be at your core to stand up for who you are. So if you don't have that, again, you're ripping out the root source of your strength. And then there's no diplomacy without that part. So that has to be there. That's the central defining core of who you are. And that is the ujung kelamin. And then you have the ujung badik, which is basically the part which is used for the attack. And that is the tactical option. And it always must be there. Even though we don't want to use it, it is not something that we cherish to use against the person, but when it's necessary, you act. And that's it. And if you're not willing to act, that means you don't really understand what is going on with your Pencak Silat. You must always be willing to act, because not being willing to act is what's going to get you killed and other people behind you killed as well. Now, also another aspect of the philosophy of the badik is understanding that the badik itself has traditionally always been something like all the classical weapons in Indonesia and Malaysia as something that has a supernatural power. Now, when we think of supernatural power, we think of it as ghosts and demons and all of this kind of stuff. Some people did interpret it like this. That is correct. But that is not always the case. Supernatural power sometimes are also the things that are brought out from you as an individual when you're under the stress of war, when you're under the stress of battle, of difficulty, of risk. Then your strength as a man and as a character comes out stronger. So that's another aspect of supernatural power, which is from the individual, and I think more applicable to our modern context than trying to negotiate with spirits to make my knife fly. So I think the natural internal power of the individual is something that we should be more focused on at this point in time, because we are away from the traditional way of looking at the more esoteric aspects of the world, which are not we understand are not not really applicable and not really realistic anymore. In the past, people used to believe that there was some power coming from the trees and the sunshine and whatever. We know this is not true. So we live in a different time. Our understanding of Silat has to adjust to the times that we live in so that it becomes relevant to our culture, relevant to our situations and to our century. Now, that is the value of Pencak Silat. It doesn't stay stable. It is a fluid river, and it always changes in direction according to what is required, but it never loses the power of its current. Never. It is always powerful. It is always moving, and it is always affecting the environment around it. But it is never, and it is never stagnant, but it is not reduced in power because it moves or changes direction. So supernatural powers should be looked at in that context as well. And it's true when we are under high risk and we are willing to act, we are willing to perform, we are willing to take the risk, that is a supernatural power within each and every one of us, individuals and warriors and pesilat, that we wouldn't have in a regular situation. So it is a very, very powerful thing. Now, the concept of the warrior culture versus the weapon culture, this is a very, very important one. There are so many weapon cultures in the world, but there are not so many warrior cultures in the world. There are some cultures which have still aspects of a warrior culture, and there are many cultures nowadays that have a lot of aspects of weapon culture. Now, what is the difference between the two? Weapon culture is where people carry weapons out of necessity, or they carry weapons out of the desire to harm other people, because there's a lot of crime happening in the environment. Those type of places are weapon cultures. People are armed out of necessity or for the purpose of doing some kind of crime or something else. The weapon is not something which has any cultural or spiritual or philosophical significance for them. It is only a tool in order to do something to harm other people to get a benefit. That's all. There's nothing else to it. So that is a weapon culture. For example, Mexico. Okay, Mexico is a good example. People carry weapons all the time, but there's no significance to that weapon for them. It doesn't have any personal meaning. It doesn't define them in terms of character. It's not part of their training. It's not part of their life. They're not going to hand it down to their children in some kind of emotional ceremony. They're not going to, it doesn't represent any values of who they are. Nothing, absolutely nothing. It's just a tool to hurt other people with. That's a weapon culture. A warrior culture, on the other hand, is a culture where the weapon is an aspect of the people's values. It represents the people's ideology, thinking, values, and mindset. That is a very, very different thing. When you look at militaries, for example, take the Marine Corps. A Marine Corps tries to institute a warrior culture amongst its Marines. And that warrior culture, they institute martial arts, they institute the camaraderie of Marines. Even after you've left the Marine Corps, you're still a Marine forever. The practice of having weapons, even though you know, it's part of who you are as a Marine because it represents your values. They try to institute a martial or warrior culture within the Marine Corps. But that is not the same as it is outside in other places. In other militaries, it's not like that at all. And maybe even in the United States and other parts of the US military, it's not like that at all. So it's just a job. You do your job, you go home, and that's it, you know. But it depends. But the point is that weapon culture and warrior culture are very, very different, even though they're identified as the same thing. When you visually see them, you might think it's the same thing, but they are so far different from one another. So, for example, if you carry a blade, when I look at a blade, I don't look at the blade as something a tool which I use only for hurting people. The blade, as we see here in the context of Pencak Silat, it represents our values and our dignity of willing to stand up for ourselves and for our communities and for our families. The willingness to take risk, to fight, to do something for your people, the responsibility that I have as a man to take care and protect my family. It represents all of those things. And it's not only using that blade to kill somebody or to fight. but also me working hard every single day to make enough money to take care of my children and my wife. It's part of that responsibility. That is a warrior culture, which is embodied within the total culture of Pencak Silat. That is not a weapon culture. Otherwise, I can take the weapon, discard the weapon, and I wouldn't feel anything because I don't need it right now. Why should I have it? But still, we keep the badik at home. Still, we keep the karambit at home. Still, we keep the kris at home. Still, we carry the kris when we get married, or we carry our weapon when we get married. We give it to our children. Why? Because we want our children to remember through a physical item the values of our Pencak Silat chivalry, of our cultural chivalry, for that we have, which we want to promote into the next generation. So it's a completely different thing, warrior culture and weapon culture. And once we distinguish those two things and how different they are, then we understand the value of protecting our systems. So when we don't say traditional systems are not good, we need MMA. This is all nonsense, complete nonsense. The traditional systems have the values of the culture and the values of the history and the people behind them. And you want to maintain those things for your children to go into the next generation, because those are the things which make the internal core of the people, of the individual and of a man. And if you don't have them, you're like an empty shell. You're like a cup with nothing inside. You have very little value. So you want to make sure there's something of value inside. So that is the warrior culture. Now, there also is the tribal identity of the Badik. The tribal identity is the importance that I mentioned before. And the Badik for the Bugis people is something which identifies that they are part of that tribe. The same way like the Rencong identifies that they are part of that tribe. It is of the tribe in Aceh. They are Achenese people. They are from the Achenese Sultanate descendants. They are part of those people. It is a tribal identity for them. So if you take that away, you physically remove that identifier. It's the same like the hijab for a Muslim woman. Why do many Muslim women, even though they can remove their hijab, they don't want to? Because it is not only just a religious issue for them, but it is also a physical reminder and identifier, like the beard for a Muslim man. You wear hair on your face as an identifier of who you are. It is not just an issue of a religious edict that you have to follow. So these are things which physically represent people, and they have values to people's personal feeling of identity and connection to the community that they belong to. Now, there are also modern interpretations of the Badik as well. So one modern interpretation, which I used to carry very much, and I absolutely love, it was my daily EDC for a long time, and that is the K-bar TDI, which you can see at the bottom over here. Again, you can see the pistol grip, okay? And that pistol grip is very, very, very beautiful and very ergonomical and works really well, and I absolutely loved it. And what I really like about this blade also was the carry system and the way that you could position it. It's positioned so well and ergonomically into the hand that you can have it and pull it in a pistol grip, or you can change the configuration and pull it into a reverse grip where it can be used as a karambit as well. Or not 100% the same, but similar in terms of the techniques, right? So I find the K-bar TDI is a very beautiful modern interpretation of the Badik. I only have one dislike about it, and that dislike is the way that it is marketed, because I think that this is cultural appropriation, which they did not give any background respect to the people where this weapon actually came from. And I find that to be very sad, where, again, the priority is making money, and the priority is not in respecting the heritage of where something comes from. And it is very clear that this is a Badik. It's very, very clear, okay? So it doesn't take a lot to figure that one out. So many people carry it, but they have no idea where it comes from. And it's the same thing that happened with the karambit. The karambit has been so popularized, the karambit has been so promoted all over in military and all of these places around the world, but people don't even know where the karambit comes from. It has been a tool which has been appropriated from that culture without any respect or any thought given to the history of where that weapon comes from and the respect to the people who actually created it. And I really dislike that. I don't think it's a good thing to do like that. If we do something and we take somebody else's, whatever somebody else does or says or is, we should at least give them that respect, just to acknowledge them. There should be some acknowledgement for that thing. So that's the only problem that I have with it. But other than that, I think it's an amazing weapon. It was my daily driver for many, many years. And throughout 8 years, yeah, that I was in Taiwan, this was my primary daily driver that I used. And like I said, it's very popular, and it's extremely popular for law enforcement also. And they love to use it because it is very easy to use, similar to a gun, the draw method. So you don't need to learn a different way to draw. You don't need to cross-body draw suddenly. You can draw from the same position that you drew your gun from. So there's not much more to learn. Now, that's a very, very useful thing. So absolutely beautiful weapon. And I think anybody who decides to carry a badik, whether it is a traditional one or a modern one, you will probably not be disappointed. You will be very happy with the weapon. Now, before we go into our Q&A, I would like to show you a video. And that video basically is some of the techniques which are used in Sulawesi to defend against the badik when you are empty-handed. Okay, so let's shift over there. I'm going to stop my screen share of this one, and I'm going to go into my other screen. And let me leave this one alone. Here it is, this one over here. 1 second, and let me reshare my screen with you guys. Here we go. And you should be able to see this one now. Now, let's take a look at some of the techniques to defend themselves, to defend against the badik. Now, here it says jurus tangkap senjata tajam. So that means a juru to tangkap, to catch, senjata, which is a weapon, tajam, a sharp weapon, di dalam tubuh lawan, in the middle of combat.
Ceritanya ini kan dia mau mengambil alih, dia sebenarnya mau memancing kita. Pas nali badina. Pas nabu naik, bubu naik. Ya anggap tahu. Jadi begini ceritanya. Kenapa? Nah, kalau umpamanya dia tidak mau tak balik ini, bisa begini. Nah, kalau dia umpamanya ini, kasih begini saja. Nah, ini kalau kita mau umpamanya itu besok ini tak ya ini dia memang kan jadi bantang. Nah, kemudian kalau mau diambil ini nih, jadi caranya diambil begini, baru dikasih begini lah ya. Sama jadi sini.
Badik di kiri, di kanan.
Ini kita kalian.
Nah, ngapa kok?
Besok naik. Ini ceritanya. Kalau kita takut sini, jadi kalau kita takut begini, pegang begini saja, baru begini. Polongan ini. Pasti sih. Punate ya kita katakan terus ini. Baru diambil. Cara ngambilnya ini begini nak. Supaya ini bisa disembeli. Nah, kalau hanya segera mau diamankan, bagusnya dikasih begini saja.
Okay, so that's just an example that we have there. Now, one of the things to keep in mind when you look at that example also is that you will see that the technique is basically to redirect the weapon against the adversary. And you'll see that the control of the primary hand and the control of the use of the secondary hand to control the draw of the weapon is very, very important. And you'll see that a lot within this different slapping techniques within Pencak Silat in Sulawesi, as they always try to catch people before they draw the weapon, because you want to identify those triangles and those boxes and things like those different body positions which are there in order to try to preempt the other person, so that you don't actually have to deal with the full force of the attack. So a lot of problems happens between people who are talking first. There is a pre-problem situation, you know, something that is pre-conflict. And that moment that is pre-conflict, where there's some kind of verbal exchange or something happening, that's usually where the Silat practitioner, especially in Sulawesi, where they immediately turn on and they say to themselves, you know what, okay, this can turn nasty. And then they try to identify where those possible positions could be, either on the side or something for a cross draw or something. And they train from those positions, which is quite interesting. And you'll see that in Sulawesi Silat and some other parts of Indonesia. You wouldn't see that. You'll see everything from a drawn position immediately. And you wouldn't see them training from the position of actually accessing a weapon that hasn't been drawn yet. So that's a difference between the Silat in Sulawesi and the Silat in other places in Indonesia. Now, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist in other places, but it's just an interesting thing that I noticed within their style of Silat. And other places, both people are weapons out and start training all the time. But I agree with the reality of it, that in our time nowadays, most probably there are no duels happening. So if you can identify some pre-conflict indicators within a person, and then be able to access that weapon before the weapon is drawn, it gives you a huge advantage, right? So that's something to keep in mind. Another very interesting part of that video was the way that he disarmed. So he disarmed with the flat of the hand and the flat of the blade. He didn't disarm by trying to do any kind of fancy. He just literally just grabbed the blade and the flat and then turned it out of the hand. There was nothing too fancy in terms of the disarm there. And I appreciate that. Now, some people would disagree with the locking and stuff like that. Personally, I don't care about the locking too much. Some people are really good at it, some people are not. And when we look at a lot of these traditional techniques like that, you have to remember that there are different skill levels for different people. And you should never judge people according to your skill level and your skill set. Just because you're not capable to do it doesn't mean that somebody else isn't. So there are people who are really, really good at this stuff, and they spend a lot of time doing it. And they're very, very fast with their locks, and they will catch you. They will catch you when you try them. And I've tried multiple people multiple times, and they caught me with their locks because they're just damn good at it. So you got to keep that in mind. And that's why be very careful in criticizing people, because your skill set and their skill set is completely different. Your experience level, their experience level is completely different. So sometimes what they are capable to do, I can't do. And what I can do, they cannot do either. So everybody is different, every background is different, every environment is different. Take it, look at it, take what is useful for you, what you can absorb for yourself, and leave the rest for that person. And that's it. That way we are giving our hormat, our respect to those people, and at the same time, we're benefiting from learning from everybody that we encounter. Okay, so that is my presentation for today. And you guys that have any questions, I'm willing to answer any questions now or anything, the comments that you have, and I'll go through them now. Let me take a look. Good morning, everyone. Jeff, my man, I am very happy to see you here again. Very, very happy. Been a long time, brother. Good to see you. Ben, Ibrahim, Jeff, Manny, good stuff seeing you guys. Very good. You guys are the cream of the crop. Very happy to see you again. Many police officers carry the TDI between their duty belt and underbelt. Okay. Most have no idea where it came from. Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah. Yeah. So it has become, as far as I understood from our brother Mikolos the other day when I spoke to him about this, he mentioned to me that it has become like a standard issue in some police departments in the United States. So those people who are carrying it, they are training with it, they are issued it by their agency or by their police department, but they have no idea of the history of it. They have no idea of the techniques of Pencak Silat using this thing. They are not involved with our systems at all. So I find that to be a huge loss, because if the police department would institute more of a warrior culture within their departments instead of a weapon culture, I think we would see a very big difference in the way that these police officers would behave, the way that they would retire, the way that they would act amongst other civilians in the society. It would be a very, very big difference in the mentality of police officers. And I think that the idea of serve and protect would have a very bigger and broader and stronger and deeper personal meaning for a lot of police officers. Because I have talked to many police officers in North America, and I've trained with many of them. And they're generally good people, but there are too many of them that are doing this as a job. It's not, they don't feel it as an honored responsibility for their life. It is a job which has benefits, and those benefits have other things related to it, and they do the job for a specific period of time because of those benefits, and that's all. They don't see it as a sacred duty for the society. So even though the side of the car may say serve and protect, they don't actually feel that inside of themselves. So I found that with people that I worked with previously, and it's not their fault. It's just they're not raised in that capacity within their departments or their agencies. And it's not the fault of the officer, it's the fault of the people who are running these systems that are basically making it a job, nothing else. There's no sacred duty in this. It is just a job for a lot of people. Now, there are many police officers who have the opposite mentality. They have a complete warrior culture. They spend their own money to go and pay for their training. They constantly improve themselves. They are consistently learning and reading and trying to be better and being more part of the community and look at the community as an extension of their own family. Those type of police officers are vastly more successful. And they are people who connect directly with the communities that they serve and they're in. So those type of police officers, I think, are the ones who have fully absorbed the context and the reality of who they are. And they're much more beneficial to the community. And those are people that I love to work with and I'm honored to work with. And people who unfortunately only see this as work, I can't connect with those people on a personal level because I'm not like that. For me, it's a sacred honor and responsibility. Even being a paramedic is a sacred honor and responsibility that you have to do your job for the community that you serve. So that's the way that I look at it, and I've always looked at it like that. And I think that is the promotion of the warrior culture, which we should be pushing and living and training, and rather than the culture of having a job. And then once my responsibilities have ended at 5 o'clock, I don't care if you're getting raped or not. You know, it's not good. It's not good like that. Okay, the older cops the warrior mentality was being pushed out. I'm seeing it away the other way again. Yeah, maybe you're right like that, bro. I think I agree with you with that. I mean, there's definitely a push within the modern law enforcement and military environment in the North America and Europe that have seen a very terrible softening of the forces. Very, very bad softening. But now we used to box and wrestle. They took that away. You see, even boxing and wrestling has been taken away. So now you literally only have your combatives, not your combatives, your defensive tactics couple of hours certification on a yearly basis. So police officers who are not trained from a perspective of warrior culture, they actually only have a few hours of combatives training. And soldiers the same. They have a few hours of combatives training. Police officers will have a few hours of defensive tactics training. What's it called? Their paramedics or whatever. They will also have a few hours of defensive tactics training to get your certification for that year, and that's it, finished. That's all you've got, nothing else, and you walk away. That's a dangerous situation, in my opinion, and I think it's counterproductive because you're going to create a bunch of people who are basically workers, and as soon as things get really dirty, they walk away. They will not put themselves in harm's way for other people. They will not take risks for other people, and they will not be willing to sacrifice or put the ultimate sacrifice for other people, even though that is part of the job responsibility. They do not see it like that. And again, it is not the fault of the officers or the soldiers or whoever else. It is the fault of the institutions that are controlling them. Okay, so that is my opinion on that one. And I totally agree with you, bro. Totally agree with that. Yeah. What else have we got? Okay. I'll wait a second. If anybody has any comments or questions, go for it. Okay, brothers, if you don't have anything else today, then we'll call it a day. And till next week, we'll come up with another presentation, of course. If you have any suggestions, you can always, of course, put it into Telegram. If there's anything specifically you want me to research, I will research it for you and present it for you. Just put your comment in Telegram. I'll do that for you. So we're finished for today. Thank you. Salam Pencak Silat. My respect and love to all of you and your families. And I will see you again next week. Take care.